Trust Board for Gloucestershire and Bristol, North Somerset, South Gloucester. I think Bren's our only member of the public here today. So Bren, welcome. For those who know him, people in Gloucestershire will know Bren well. People in BNSSG perhaps not so much, but makes an active contribution in our communities, particularly around Gloucestershire, around healthcare. So Bren, and we got some questions to you at the end from you at the end of the board today. We might cover some of that during the conversation. Welcomes and apologies. I don't think there's any new faces apart from Stephen, who I mentioned this morning. Stephen is the chair of BNSSG's ICP, so Integrated Care Partnership. There's a couple of new faces here. So Stephen, do you want to just introduce yourself to those, because there's a couple of people who weren't here this morning, and then I'll go to a couple of other faces around the table I haven't just picked up on.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. I'm Stephen Williams. I'm the councillor for Westby-on-Trim and Henleys in the City of Bristol. For the council, I chair the Public Health and Communities Committee. I'm effectively the cabinet member for that area, but I also chair the City's Health and Wellbeing Board, and this year the Integrated Care Partnership for Bristol, North Somerset and South Gloucester.
Thanks, Stephen. I don't think we've met.
Hi, Jeff. I'm Faye Gladwin, and I'm Senior Performance Manager for Mental Health at BNSSG ICB.
Okay, thanks, Faye. Denise, you're here for one item, or are you representing Rosie?
Yes, well, representing Rosie and also to talk to the paper about mental health at various places.
Okay, and alongside you?
Hello, Ford. I am Programme Director in Gloucestershire ICB.
Okay, thanks, Helen. So I'll move us into the agenda then. So I've got a few apologies. I've got Joe Bailey, Emma Crutchlow, Joe Higgs, Maria Kane, Martin Holloway, Kevin McNamara, Kevin Pelton and Messenger, Mark Cook, Rachel Pierce, Rosie Shepherd, and Kate Usmar, and John Martin from SWAST. Anyone else I've missed?
We've got Richard Snell representing him.
Yeah, Richard's here. Yeah. Anyone else I've missed on those? No? Okay. Declarations of interest. Is there anything that people haven't notified us of by way of conflict of interest, or any declarations of interest that might relate to the agenda for today? No? Great. Okay. Thank you very much. So we've got the board meeting from the last time we met. There's I don't think we've got any particular actions from that, have we?
No, because the board met in closed session, so not for this open session. So there's no minutes, no actions from before, because there was nothing.
Okay, great. So let me take us into the Chief Exec's report then, Shane.
Thank you, Chair. So colleagues, normally it's three big things. It's two big things for this month, because they are so fundamentally important to the ICB and the organisation. So two things I want to bring to attention to the board, you all have the paper obviously, is an update on our organisational changes, and then actually the really important bit about strategic commissioning and the recent correspondence with NHSE about how we will be moving forward with strategic commissioning. With regards then to the organisational changes, the board will be aware that we had hoped we would have produced a final consultation report by now, following obviously our organisational changes and the consultation. In the paper, you will see the timeline that we have. We have pushed that timeline slightly back, and the reason being is that we had a fabulous response to our consultation. We had over 350 responses. We had 322 individual meetings with staff. We had 24 workshops and team meetings, which meant that we had hoped we would finish all of the consultation and reproduce the consultation outcome by now. But with the permission of the chair and the transition committee, we've moved that back by about a week to 10 days to enable us to take cognizance of all the input, which allows us now to move a slightly different timeline. You can see in the paper, we do intend to bring to the transition committee next week the final position, which will then be communicated in the middle of June to all staff, which enables us to get on with organisational changes through July and August, with a view still to have all posts filled as far as is possible by the beginning of September. So you will see there, that's the position we're at the moment. It is a slight delay, but a justifiable delay, because our staff have given so much amazing input that we want to make sure we capture that and deliver the right product. What I have included in my report, though, is just to give you an understanding of how the consultation process has worked. I'm not going to go through that in detail, but it was a formal consultation. It was 45 days long. It was to staff. It wasn't a wider consultation to partner organisations, but many partners did give input, which was very, very helpful. And as I say, I do hope we'll have that signed off at the transition committee and allows us to move forward. The second part of the report then, Chair, I think it is fundamental to the future of the ICB, hence why I think it's so important it's here today. So you will see from the papers that Jim Mackey, as Chief Executive of the NHS, wrote to all ICB Chief Executives on the 1st of April. Unfortunate time to send a letter, but anyway, on the 1st of April. And it clearly said, please answer the 4 following things. The first one was, what does strategic commissioning mean to you? The second one then is, how do you intend to develop neighbourhood health? The third one was, well, actually, how do you want to change financial flows? And the fourth one then is very much about, well, how can we help from the centre? So you will see in the paper, Chair, the response that we collectively made to Jim's office and submitted in line with the timeline, which was a very short timeline. But in summary, what we have put back in that response, and you have the whole response in the pack, but in summary, what we've said is that neighbourhood health is our primary way to deliver transformation. So as an organisation, as a system, neighbourhood health is absolutely the way. We talk about the need to build integrated multidisciplinary teams for defined populations, bringing together primary care, community care, BCSE, etc. And we reaffirmed our commitment to that. But what we did a little bit more in the paper was saying, and by the way, we're not taking a broad brush approach to this. If this is going to work, we have to live by what strategic commissioning is, narrow down onto the cohorts that need the biggest change now, and that will allow us to then make further changes. So you'll see in the paper, Chair, the cohort we talk about is frailty, and frailty isn't just a thing of older people, because frailty could be multi-morbidity. So you could be frail actually and not particularly old. We're talking about frailty, and it's very clear, and if we use a Gloucestershire statistic, which we have used in the paper, frailty and high-level multi-morbidity are about 3% of the population of Gloucestershire. They consume 60% of the hospital beds. So if we can really drive a neighbourhood model that gets an outstanding service for that small number of people and give them care in the place they need, we can not just turn a good care model out, we can turn a good business model out, which says, and actually, if we can start to take money out of the acute, we can then replicate and do other things upstream. So we've been very clear in the paper to NHSE that we are establishing strategic commissioning in all its glory, which is about understanding the population, defining strategy, putting services on the ground and evaluating whether they're working. We're going to do all of that, but we're starting with a focus on frailty, because that small cohort has a huge impact on cost, but that small cohort will not remain a small cohort, because we know what's coming over the hill is that a cohort which is just growing and growing and growing, and we have to get the right models in place for the future. So that's primarily what the paper talks about, Chair. And one thing we have done, we have asked for support from NHSE around some of the issues about flows of money, trying new ways of, so it's something that we have asked for from assistance, but fundamentally what it's saying is we as a ICB need to really grab strategic commissioning. And it's interesting because you then see the other half of the letter, which I've not gone into huge detail in my report, Chair, but you will see it in the paper. Then there are a number of other things that we have been asked to make sure we do well: outpatient transformation, urgent emergency care reform, digital productivity, etc. And we have plans to do that. But if we do not crack frailty, we are simply not fit for the future, and we have to crack frailty. So, Chair, I'm really happy to take thoughts, comments, and questions, but it was a very timely input from Jim Mackey. I think our response collectively gives a very clear direction, and I would suggest that this response, if agreed by NHSE, I think it will be with maybe tweaks, become a really important part of our committees, because if this is the direction, this is what we've got to do, we have to make sure our committees are set up to hold us true to that direction, as opposed to here's our business and the committee does that, and actually we're taking the system in a different direction, Chair. So really happy to take thoughts, comments and questions, Chair.
Thanks, Shane. Any questions or comments for Shane? So I've got Ellen and then Alison.
Shane, can you respond for this? And also I appreciate the way that you shared the letter with us, that you shared your response, asked for feedback and really involved the board in that. And I think that's really positive. I appreciate the detailed thinking in the paper. You've gone into an awful lot of detail and thinking, and I really welcome the focus on frailty. I think as a system, many of us who've been involved in BNSSG talked about flow, no criteria to reside, and the impact that then has on the care that we can offer. So I really, really appreciate the going down that route. You mentioned full implementation of a framework by April 2027. Yeah. I just wonder whether you could say a little bit more about, as you'd imagine I'd ask, the practicalities of that, how that might sort of affect our population, and any brave decisions you're going to have to be taking on the movement of money.
Yeah, so there is no doubt April 2027 is not far away.
No,
okay. And that's why from a Gloucestershire perspective, we've created a memorandum of understanding between community, acute, primary care to try and drive some of this forward. And in BNSSG, we're kicking off a piece of work to design, and that happens on Friday with the chief executives. What I would say is both systems have come very far in their thinking and implementation of neighbourhood health. So we're not starting from a zero base. We have to get to a position whereby in the beginning of April, we have a clear route to commission neighbourhood health, in our case, against frailty. That is something I think raised it earlier. We have to narrow down. We can't keep doing everything. Yeah. And the focus of the organisation has to be on designing that. It's a hard stop. I mean, the government will hold us to account. It's in the 10-year plan. We as commissioners have to have a plan for commissioning neighbourhood health by April. And therefore, that's our focus.
Okay. So, Alison?
Shane, thanks very much. As always, a really informative paper. Just focusing a little bit on the planning priorities and the focus on frailty. Completely agree with the approach, and it will make lives better. There's been a lot of attempts in the past around people who are frail. We're not starting this from zero. So I guess the questions in the new ICB world are: have you had a chance to work through yet what it is we understand from the previous attempts in Gloucestershire, BNSG and wider, about how we can be more successful now? Because I believe it needs a big step change as opposed to a small step change. So have we got any insights on that yet? And secondly, in new ICB world role, what's being clear what the ICB role is now as to what the ICB role might have been in the past. So what is it that the ICB will be leading, supporting, contributing to in a way that's different with its new roles and responsibilities as in the old role?
Yeah. If I start with the latter one, so that's part of the conversation we're having, because the overall responsibility for the health of our population and in neighbourhoods absolutely connects to health and wellbeing boards and the neighbourhood strategies that health and wellbeing boards have produced. From a healthcare perspective, our job is to bolt in and lead on health care for neighbourhoods. Okay, so that's our job. And as a commissioner, we will not be saying it must look like this or it must look like that. As a commissioner, we'll be going to our partners. I hope they remain partners, but our providers, to say, here is what we need to achieve. Can you work with us to design what that looks like? And we're really clear that's what we have to do as an ICB. We don't design and put a specification out and say, please respond to the specification. We need to put outcomes out there and say, come in and design. We know that we have to do that. I'm not too sure we or any other ICB is quite prepared for that change in design process. because that is a true co-designed approach, which will then be contracted for as opposed to a specification. We are starting work quite far down the work road with children's services to begin to explore, could the new children's services contract be in that space? And we have now the work we're kicking off with neighbourhoods, looking at it from a frailty perspective. But the reality is we're at the beginning of that joint journey. The other thing then is when we begin to benchmark, there are other places in the world that have done things, and we've also looked at some of that. And you can't help but come back to the work in Alaska and the work in Cambridge, the work in New Zealand, in Canterbury. And again, active, particularly the Alaska work, we've got a partnership with the Alaskan people now, and they have taken that idea of frailty and wrapping around a concierge service around the older person. So the older person is absolutely looked after socially and health-wise to avoid hospital admission and keep them well longer. And they have absolutely avoided hospital admission. They've downturned their demand at the front door of ED dramatically. Now, it's 70,000 people in Alaska, okay? So we're not talking, but taking the learning from that and bringing it to our models of care. So it is the most exciting part, I think, of the 10-year plan, but it's also the most challenging part of the 10-year plan because we are going down a path that we've not been down before. Okay, I think Joe Medhurst might want to come in as well.
Did I answer your question? Hang on, Joe.
It did, it absolutely answers. Sorry, it does answer it, and I think that there's a risk, isn't there, that the comfort of old ways of doing things will, so the discipline needed at all points, at all levels of any interaction about this is our role now, and this is, it's going to have to be quite, disciplined, I guess, isn't it?
Okay, thanks, Alison. Joe?
I was thinking about population health and my role. I think what will be different is, for years, Alison, there was the Right Care Toolkit, which is very good. Don't buy some new grey. There's lots of things you can take off the shelf and go, that's pretty good. And it moves the curve forward for everybody. But population health isn't just that. It is that, but on top of it, we need to be looking at pockets and communities and clusters of people, not just geographically, but around personal characteristics, and going within that neighbourhood, there is a pocket of people who are disproportionately affected, who we need to treat differently to the overarching change programme for all. And I think the data sets we're now in, where we can retrospectively go back to that NHS number, go, well, that's that person and that person and that person and that person, allows us not only to do the generalised slow improvement, but to do the targeted improvement. And hopefully, and otherwise I'm not going to do this job, we narrow the gap. And we now have the technology, to quote something from many years ago, where we can start doing that with the data, with the focus, and we connect to the neighbourhood clinical teams that do the work. So I think we really could do something fundamentally different, where you don't just see a little tweak around the edges, but you really do see a shift, a real noticeable, statistically significant shift in outcomes, I am hoping.
Thanks, Joe. Jake?
Just to say, to share with GP colleagues and had a very positive response. It was very clear and there was nothing in it that people could disagree with. I think it was seen as a very positive document and of a length that you could engage with. It's about the right length that GPs can read it, so it's very positive.
Thanks, Jake. Any other questions for Shane on his essay? No? Okay, I'll move us on to managing out area placements then. Dave, you start us off on this.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. So just introduce Faye, Denise and Helen again, who are going to walk us through the paper. And this is a joint cluster paper, which walks us through our medium-term plan requirements to eliminate inappropriate out-of-area mental health placements. It's been a long-term ambition in successive frameworks to reduce out-of-area care for patients receiving mental health support, which is recognised as compromising quality, taking patients away from families, homes and support networks, and can restrict access to community services which support people to leave hospital. The medium-term plan now requires ICBs and mental health providers to eliminate out-of-area care. Both ICBs have worked with providers and are fully committed to this aim. And in addition, specific action has been requested by NHSE, as well as our ongoing actions to audit all placements, including adults with learning disabilities or autism within these settings, which was specific why Denise has joined us to speak to that point. NHSE have also specifically requested that this is discussed and shared in public, which is why we're here today, for that public oversight and assurance of the actions that we are taking. So we are here to ask the board to consider the paper and the actions that are taken, and the assurance that all placements are accounted for. Also asked to consider the progress being made and whether the steps in place, including the identified risks and recommendations, are sufficient to fully deliver those asks by March 28 across both BNSG and Gloucestershire. So I'll ask Faye to walk us through the paper and the key findings and risks, yeah, clearly, if Douglas and Dominic would like to add at the end, then please do. Thank you. Faye.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Chair. So in terms of background, briefly, and current assurance, in March 2026, NHS England wrote to all integrated care boards and mental health providers, asking them to identify alternative placements for patients who were in St Andrew's Healthcare inpatient unit in Northampton. This followed enforcement action announced in December, which required improvements in patient safety. As Dave has said, out-of-area care is widely recognised as something that can affect quality of care, and there are national concerns about whether systems have full oversight of all patients placed out of area. A small number of patients were identified at St Andrews, and alternative arrangements have now been made for all of those patients. Following this, NHS England has now requested that ICBs provide assurance on patients placed out of area on where they are through a monthly audit. And both Gloucestershire and BNSSG ICB have just completed the second of those monthly audits. As the paper shows, a number of teams across the ICB cluster make mental health placements out of area, including both mental health trust providers and the ICB's own individual placement funding teams. As such, meeting the requirements in the medium-term plan to reduce and eliminate this practice will need coordinated work across commissioning, nursing and quality leads in both integrated care boards and in the future merged organisation. While the audit shows the number of placements is relatively low, and that the requirement to ensure alternative provision for any patients at St Andrews has been met, there is more to do to strengthen oversight across all bed types in scope and across all teams making placements. All integrated care boards have been asked to discuss their progress in public. We understand that we are the first system in the Southwest to do this, and we will work with our regional peers, sharing findings and good practice to inform future learning. So in terms briefly of the medium-term plan requirements, as Dave said, the medium-term plan requires systems to achieve the following headline ask: localise care, reduce out-of-area placements, and end the commissioning of locked rehabilitation inpatient services. This is supported by specific yearly targets across the duration of the plan. To truly localise care, we need both the development of local services and sufficient capacity to meet need, alongside the processes to ensure that future placements are both in area and appropriate. There's significant work underway across both systems to achieve this, which is described at a high level in the paper. In summary, against each aim, the ICBs are currently as follows. For 26-27 assurance, the overall position is mixed across the system. Gloucestershire is currently maintaining a stronger position and continuing to perform well against the ambition to eliminate inappropriate out-of-area placements. In BNSSG, while March and April data indicated very good progress that had been sustained for a 6-month period at 0 out-of-area placements, this has not been sustained in recent weeks due to increased pressure on flow across the acute mental health pathway, including higher clinically ready for discharge activity, reduced local bed availability, and longer lengths of stay. AWP has appropriate oversight and recovery action in place through clinically led improvement work focused on flow, discharge, and alternatives to admission, alongside mitigating actions to strengthen assessment and admission avoidance ahead of the new mental health emergency department opening at Callington Road Hospital. This remains under close review with continued system focus and support on restoring delivery against the planned trajectory. In addition, while the number of patients placed out of area through individual placement teams is low, we have identified that improved reporting will help us assure ourselves on progress and identify any issues that require attention. In 2027-28, ICBs must commission in line with the mental health inpatient framework. This document is important because it sets out expectations for how ICBs should commission mental health inpatient provision. In BNSSG, an inpatient transformation board has been developed over the last few years to implement the framework and drive up the quality of care. However, we have recognised that in BNSSG, we can further align this board and the work of AWP with individual placement teams in our ICBs to ensure a consistent application of the framework. Gloucestershire also has an established inpatient programme and governance structure, and the systems can work more closely together to review how the framework is being applied moving forward. And by the end of March 2028, the requirement is that we will have reduced our placements to 0. We are well placed to do this and have identified risk and actions to mitigate and manage them so that we can fully achieve the required transformation and improve quality of care. In terms of risks, in compiling this audit and developing this paper in partnership with teams across BNSSG and Gloucestershire ICBs, a number of risks have been identified that may affect full delivery of the medium-term plan. These will require leadership and careful management across teams and both ICBs. Mitigating recommendations have been made in the paper, and the board is asked to support these. These include developing further standardised reporting on out-of-area placements, ensuring robust processes for non-BNSSG and Gloucestershire patients are in place. The risks also highlight the need for continued development of admission avoidance services, especially for people with a learning disability and autistic adults. Initiatives already in place across both systems to support patient flow and reduce the number of people clinically ready for discharge at any one time need to be maintained in order to support bed capacity. Work is required in both systems to develop community care and capability to support the most complex and high-risk individuals within the community. And finally, good progress has been made in aligning with the mental health commissioning framework for mental health inpatient services, and there is now an opportunity to standardise our approach across both systems and learn from best practice to ensure all provision commissioned is in line with this framework by March 2027. So to conclude, the board is asked to consider whether firstly, assurance has been provided that both ICBs can account for all of their patients out of area. And secondly, the progress made, risks and recommendations are sufficient to ensure full delivery of the medium-term plan by 2028, and whether any further risks or priority areas should be included. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Faye. Do you want to bring Denise and Helen in, or shall I open up to questions, Dave?
And or whether Dominic or Douglas wants to come in.
Bring Dominic in the end of it.
Yes. Very happy to talk about this. Just stepping back from it, why do we have out-of-area investment tools? It's really interesting. And the answer in BNSSG, and I don't want to speak for Douglas in Gloucestershire, he can make his own case, is we can evidence very clearly we haven't been investing enough in services. We can evidence that really, really clearly. If you look at data from the Royal College of Psychiatrists, who have benchmarked spending on mental health across all
Dominic, you may need
ICBs.
to speak up a little bit.
Sorry.
I think people at the end of the table might be struggling.
Can you hear me? If you look at benchmarking from the Royal College of Psychiatrists, who have benchmarked all ICBs across the country over the past 4 years, in BNSSG we spend £40 less per head on mental health services than the England average. And if you compare us with Cornwall, Devon and Dorset, that's more like £80 to £90 per head less on mental health services. Gross that up for our population, 40 to 140 million gap. That's not small. If you also triangulate that with NHS benchmarking data, AWP has in the lowest decile of beds per 100,000 population in the country, the lowest quartile for community staff per 100,000 population in the country, and just below the midpoint for crisis resolution home treatment teams per 100,000 population in the country. As a result, patients present very late in the pathway. They're very, very unwell. We have over 90% admitted through the Mental Health Act. That means that we have to deem that they need to be admitted under a legal framework and deprive them of their liberty, in essence, to ensure that they get the treatment that they need. Now, the pressure valve is out of area placements. And we've seen it balloon at one point. I mean, I've been here 6.5 years. At one point, we were at 72 post-COVID. And for much of the past year, we've held it at 0. So long term, we need to address that. And that doesn't necessarily mean we need to invest lots more in beds, because actually, if you walk our wards, you'll find lots of patients there who, if an alternative model of care were available, they wouldn't need to be there at all. But what we do need to do is to work closely with the voluntary community sector and invest in community services. Finally, there's a tactical element to this as well, or a seasonal element to this. If you talk to our senior leaders, they will say that there's a palpable sense that local authorities, probably unintentionally, dial back their support into mental health between about January and March, which means that the number of patients waiting for housing or social care goes up. And then if you look at the seasonality of mental health presentations and admissions across the country, they start to grow in May and they peak in July. So we have the double whammy of more patients stranded and then more patients coming in, and then it kind of balloons and then we get it back under control. So there's a kind of tactical operational bit and then there's a strategic bit. We own most of that. That's our job as the Mental Health Trust. So I'm not, throwing water bombs. I'm just trying to put the facts out there. And Shane very graciously allowed myself and Jo Walker, when she was in BNSSG, at the moment that position hasn't yet been filled, to chair the Mental Health HSIC Healthcare Improvement Group, which is a system collaborative where we analyse and share these problems together and find solutions. So I'm absolutely not saying, oh, it's nothing to do with us, it's all everyone else's fault. That's not the issue. We have a shared problem here that we need to find solutions to. I am assured that the processes we have with the ICB are really robust. They're also really collaborative and we get on really well and we can have a bit of to and fro and so on. But there is a strategic problem that we need to address long term as an ICB. And there are also tactical supports that we need, in particular from local authorities, which I have written to them about, and they know, they have the numbers and they know what the challenges are. So this is going to be an ever-present problem for us that we need to manage. But we have a good approach to how we're
Dominic, thanks. I mean, that's a useful context. And, we've been travelling this path, haven't we, for many years. And I think the complexity and the underfunding and the challenges for AWP demonstrate some of that. But you really have got your teeth into this. So it's changed dramatically in the last couple of years. And I think making sure that's fed into how we progress, I think is really important. I know I'm probably asking the obvious here, but we have got that engagement across AWP to make sure that we're having the right conversations. Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Thanks, Dominic. Faye.
Yeah, if I could just respond to Dominic and completely support what he was saying there.
Sorry.
the fact that AWP and our system did manage to significantly reduce down to 0 out-of-area placements last autumn was all credit to incredible amount of grip and focus that was done in AWP, and they then managed to sustain it for a period of 6 months. Unfortunately, in May we've seen an uplift, but I have complete assurance that they will get that back under control. But it is enormous pressure that they're under, and staff are under to achieve that. And I think if we look at the mental health inpatient commissioning framework, which is what this is all about, and we need to be compliant, I would agree with Dominic that if we're really going to achieve that and sustain it long term, it is a real commitment from the system to invest further in our community mental health services. We know that most of the patients that are admitted to AWP wards are very, very unwell, under detention. We know what their primary diagnosis is, and we know that most of them are non-adherent to their medication. So we know what we need to fix in the community, but it's not something we can do within existing resources. We have within us complete capability to know what we need to do. It's just we're running on thin air a little bit.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and we do know there's a knock-on effect to all our services, isn't there? If you don't grip it. Sorry, Douglas.
Thank you. I won't repeat some of Dominic's analysis, some of which is the same, some of it will be a bit different for Gloucestershire. Couple of things. The Gloucestershire position here, particularly for acute inappropriate out of area, because there are some appropriate use of out of area, which are recognised. But inappropriate out of area, we have had a fairly long period of pretty consistent achievement of 0 or around 0. I've mentioned to previously the Gloucestershire ICB board, we always need a break glass clause against the 0 target, and that is what we put into our plan, because we have to stand by clinicians managing risk here and say if there is no alternative at all, and I personally have signed off out of areas on call over a weekend, and I know there is no alternative. So from that point of view, we will always continue to do that, but it can't be the rule. It has to be the absolute exception. So we've had that long track record, at the same time as having quite long, slightly longer lengths of stay than the national average. Which is unusual. Mostly you'll say you've got longer lengths of stay, therefore you're doing lots of out of area. So therefore, we've had probably more pressure in our community-focused risk holding at home. From that point of view, would be the logical extension of that. Just one addition to the paper, and this is because of time. We have had a small uptick, or a fairly significant uptick in the last couple of weeks to that very long-term, very low use, but some specific issues about closure of some capacity that's causing us a bit of an issue. But alongside Dominic's point about just the point that our demand is high from that point of view. My main thought here is that these are signs of being at the edge and on the margins all the time. It is very unusual for us to go into a weekend with spare mental health beds of any description. And that is a consistent picture. To be honest, it happened once about February, and I was on call and I thought there's 2 or 3 beds spare going on a Friday night. This is very unusual. If you've got a system in that kind of always at the edge, that this is the pressure release valve that you sometimes have to use. So it's just minimising that. So support some of Dominic's comments there. So hopefully that gets a bit extra flavour for Gloucestershire. Thank you.
Thanks, Douglas. That's helpful. So I've got Ellen, Aisha, and then Joe.
Thanks for the update, great. And can I just say well done to Gloucestershire and well done to BNSSG and to Dominic for that performance. I mean, I've sat in many of the outcomes quality performance committees where it's been really challenging, so great effort. Couple of points. Differential in spend, I've never heard it so starkly put before. Is that sustainable? Is the current performance sustainable with that kind of differential in spend? So that's just a general question to possibly come back in the future with. The recent issues on flow resulting in out-of-area placements, what's going to be different in the future? So therefore, in December, if suddenly flow is a problem again, what's going to be different? That means we can get to that 0 or maintain 0. And the last one is risk of 5, which is at 16. and that's about lack of local division, which I think Douglas just mentioned. What is the position on that? You've got mitigations in there, but given the challenging processes that we're going through at the moment with transformation, are we making sure we keep on top of those areas? So a couple of observations.
Shane, do you want to come in on that? And I don't know whether Dominic or Douglas have got anything to add to that, because you've painted the picture, Dominic, which is more challenging in some areas than others. But Shane.
I would absolutely defer to Dave and colleagues on that one, Chair. I don't know the answer in terms of the market development we're doing with regards to.
So it's the red brush.
Yeah, brush number 5.
Red 5, yeah, where it's local division. So it's just basically, you know, are we on top of that while we go through this period of change?
Just rewinding the 3 questions, differential and spend will have to come back to. I'll ask Faye to come in on what difference to get to 0. In terms of the risk and governance, we are currently retaining all of our existing BNSSG and Gloucestershire governance. Okay, so the Care Improvement Group, Dominic co-chairs or chairs is still in place. This is where those system risks and action plans are. We're not fundamentally changing that, and we won't fundamentally change it until we're clear on where we go next. In terms of the governance in place, that has that. In terms of the consultation we just discussed, or we are retaining leadership in mental health and learning disability and autism services, both in commissioning and in a nursing and quality perspective. So those, so that governance is still there to enable us to work through these risk issues.
So risk 5, you think we'll be able to make progress on that?
So I think we will be able to make progress on that. We still have the governance in place.
Okay. Do you want to come on that, Dominic?
Just 2 things. We have system and trust level transformation plans, which are kind of short, medium, long term, which will hopefully make things better. I'm really happy to share some of those at the appropriate place. The one to just highlight, which is mentioned in the report, is the opening of a new mental health assessment centre at Callington Road, which is very much designed to avoid the need for admissions under the Mental Health Act. By somebody is unwell for whatever reason, they can come into a place, sit down with somebody clinical and possibly a peer support worker, and we can say to them, would you like to stay overnight just while we think and talk things through and see if that works a bit better for you, and then we'll decide tomorrow what we do. And there's really good evidence that kind of collaborative approach with the patient themselves makes a big difference. We haven't had that capacity before. It's new, and we'll be one of several pilots in the country doing that. And the other kind of curious conundrum, which is very much my problem to manage, but is just really interesting, is I also know our services are quite inefficient. So there's a big opportunity, if we can drive productivity, that we can use some of that gain to improve access. So that will help earlier in the pathway, because we can get people in earlier and help avoid the issues.
Okay, Dave?
Check, let's bring Denise on individual patient placements, though. That's part of that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I think I recognise everything that's been said by everybody so far around this paper, and the bit that I think is important to remember is the cohort within the cohort, and that's the people with learning disability and autism, where a hospital admission is not the pathway of care that they need. They need that therapeutic, community-based, home-based environment to kind of be able to meet their needs. Their trajectory can be very static, and so we need to recognise that we're not looking to fix the problem with someone with learning disability and autism. And I think we're seeing, we've got some really good examples of where we've done some really good collaborations with local authorities around finding bespoke houses for these individuals so that they can live with a really good commissioned package of care to meet their needs. But I would say that there's still further work that we could do with local authorities on the sufficiency of that type of housing, so that we're not reacting and we've got more of a proactive approach to that. And we're maturing in that space. I think we're learning it each time we have an example that we work through. We kind of mature our model and we mature our ability to come together sooner. And I think this paper represents a small cohort where traditionally they may have been admitted to a hospital setting, and that option is no longer available to us for reasons beyond this audit, but actually a mental health admission for someone without a mental health condition is no longer appropriate. So there's further work we can do in the community. And I think we need to get absolutely confident that our strategic planning is in place because of the numbers of children that we're seeing coming through the system with increasingly complex needs. So the strategic opportunities are immense, and I think we need to kind of start having more open conversations about how we're going to manage these people so that they have a really good quality of life. It's not about a health problem that we can fix, it's about providing the conditions for them to live well in the community.
So Denise, can I check that the conversations that you're talking about operationally are then feeding into our strategy for how we deal with it, that the mechanisms are there to deal with that? So because there's others here like local authority, police, who also play a key part in this, don't they, about the moment of crisis?
Yeah, so in the paper you'll see reference to the Kingfisher unit, which is a really important part of the jigsaw puzzle, but there's also in the paper refers to the Learning Disability Oversight Board. That tracks back to the Assured Transformation cohort, where we were asked to discharge people from institutional settings who had learning disability and autism. That, working with that cohort, has generated the opportunity for us to really understand what the needs of these individuals are, and they are not standardised. It is not a kind of one size fits all. So to get the multi-professional, multi-agency people around the table early is absolutely critical for that. The Learning Disability and Autism Oversight Board will give us an opportunity to say, who are our people? Where are they? Have we got a plan for each of those individuals? And if we haven't got a good enough plan, what do we need to kind of really get?
And is that board meeting now? Is that already up and running?
It's fledgling because of staff turnover, Jeff, but with absolutely commitment from system partners in the ODG to kind of operational delivery group to kind of make that a reality in our system.
It would be helpful, Shane, if you can give us an update on that, because I think that would be of real interest to everyone around the table about how that's progressing.
Yeah. Certainly, Chair.
So I've got Aisha and Joe.
Thank you. Can you hear me, everyone? If you can. So thank you. It's a really good paper, and I think it highlights a lot of good progress to address quite a challenging area. I was particularly interested in the showing Gloucestershire and BNSSG separately. There's lots of really good stuff at the end about it's all going to start coming together. And I guess my question is, and the need to learn, to what extent is that happening already, where you're kind of saying, okay, how do you do it in your area? Because reading the mental health centres and the emergency department, you think some really good ideas there and some performance, really good performance. How are you learning that already and sharing that? Because will this be reported for the ICB cluster, so it won't be reported for the places anymore? Because at the moment it's BNSSG. If you're starting to move to a reporting framework where it's going to be together, we'll need to start reporting the performance of the numbers about their replacements together, won't we?
So this is the first time we've written a cluster paper on both
it's great,
organisations. So we've learned a lot just drafting the paper, and if Neil was here, he would be getting high fives from me to pull this into some sort of legible paper that we can really understand the story. I think we are starting to do that soft intelligence sharing, but we haven't got the committee and the governance formalised yet. So that's what will happen as we mature through organisational change. I think there's no question about not doing it together. It's just about developing the systems and the ability to have the conversation. And that's the bit that we're
So I think that's what the shame, because this isn't just about mental health, it's about everything about how we bring together the work in the two different areas.
Yeah, I think it's very clear in the organisational design is that we are not having a mental health team Gloucestershire, mental health team BNSSG. We're not having a primary care Gloucestershire. We are designing in one. However, the challenges in different places may be different. So it's not a uniform blank, everything must be the same. But actually, it is the fact that we will bring it to one place. And at the moment, we're in cluster state. Cluster status takes us to a position where we do have individual accountability still to NHSE and all kinds of stuff. When we become a merged organisation, the concept of cluster will just simply disappear. So our structures are being hardwired to think of it as a new system. But, and I really stress this in all kinds of places, we are 4 places. Those 4 places feel different, have different things. So the 4 places have to fit into it, but it is not 2 separate systems as it moves forward.
Okay, Aisha?
I did have another question, which was, I'm really glad that you mentioned children and young people, because I think in children's, you've had things like the John Braby case. I was working in London in that area when that was all coming out, and there is a lot of good stuff that's happened. The key working, evaluation is really positive. So you're going to have children and young people coming towards adult services with some expectations around the joined up nature of their care, and they're going to reach to a transition point, and we need to make sure that when they transition into adult services, that we can meet their expectations of good quality coordinated care with a key worker. I know it mentioned that you've got similar care coordinators, and linked to that is at what point are we going to kind of have that voice in some of this is going to be absolutely really important as well. And I think this is an area where we could be doing something around payments, because some of the children's services have done some quite good work with alliance contracts around inpatient admission for CAMS, etc. So is this an area, we're talking about funding, where we could actually be quite innovative about working together to look at really exciting models of doing care really differently and paying for that care in an outcome-based way over a long-term period?
Okay, thanks, Aisha. I think the good points. Denise, I'm not ask you to come back on that, because I think we'll go into the detail of the service then. And I think Shane just needs to bring back here that strategically we've got it right. That detail that Aisha's raised needs to be in there. But Joe.
Yeah, mine got a development suggestion. I like a development suggestion on a paper. So obviously we are now strategic commissioners based on population health data. Looking at the paper here, I've got some crude numbers, but I don't know the breakdown of out-of-area placements male, female, ethnicity, age ratios. Dominic, you said very anything about seasonal variation. That should be in the paper so we can see that. Faye, you said we need more commissioning, we need more investment. But where do we start? Where's the priority cohorts? Where's that population health analysis? And I'm going to suggest to the board, when we do commissioning papers as an ICB, we should always have a population health segment now, even if we don't have the data, so we know what we're building. I can build a team that can respond to the need of the system. But I think we should have that. And I know with some of the sectioning rates, Dominic, there are some issues around ethnicity. It'd be really good to see that. How do we benchmark across national? Because if we're going to do, we're not going to be able to commission for everything for everybody across this enormous place. We won't have the funds, we know that, but we might want to target investment, but you can't tell that from the paper. So it's not for now, and it's not a criticism of the paper, but it's as we shift our approach, I think we need to see a section that has that within it and starts to build that intel, which I need to be part of because I need to give you the intel.
Joe, I do agree with you. We might not have the answers now, but you're absolutely right. We need to be building that in, don't we? So when we're having the conversation, if we haven't got that data, which is what the digital should give us now, and if Jane then at SHIP has not got that detail of where those are, because actually we might be sat here blindsided, and we don't know. And Dominic will probably have a better idea, as would probably Douglas. But there may be pockets of our communities which have got acute problems that we're blindsided on.
We do additional commission, but we do the wrong thing and we just widen structure and equity.
Yeah.
And we can't tell that unless we've got data sets to look at that and monitor it over time. So we just need to build that in as part of our core sort of algorithm for these papers.
I think you're absolutely right, and I completely agree. And if you see in the paper, sometimes the data is held at team level. So we do need to pull that up into that kind of big overview.
I don't know. Don't ask him what's your ethnicity recording numbers. There's some basic housekeeping we will need to do that. So it's just an improvement suggestion. It's not a real criticism of the paper. It's an improvement suggestion as how we move forward together.
I'm going to give Shane the last word. I'm going to move us on in a second. I think we've covered the recommendations. I think Dave and Faye have run us through both of them. And it's been very informative. But Shane, if you want to just pick this up, and then I'm going to move us on.
So two things. First of all, we have a responsibility to design that into our paper production. That is a responsibility that sits across all directorates. The information will or may come from Population Health Improvement Directorate, but actually as a commissioner, a strategic commissioner, we have to take that. So absolutely our responsibility to design it in. We have to design it in. The second thing is I don't think we can leave hanging the comments that Dominic made with regards to the benchmark investment. And I think as a board, and certainly as a chief executive, we have to now go and say, right, what does that mean for us as BNSSG in Gloucestershire in terms of thinking about investment. And I agree with you, Dominic. The last thing I want you to do is put up more beds, because I don't believe that's the answer. But actually, what is the answer? As commissioner, so you can have a provider performance challenge, and that can sometimes mask a commissioning challenge, because actually it's all about, is the provider doing the right thing? And I think and you and I have shared this conversation before, when you surface the Royal College of Psychiatrists thinking we would produce those numbers, we have a commissioning challenge as well as a provision challenge. So as a board, we need to take that on board. As chief executive, I need to take that on board. We need to work with our team to ask the question, what is the commissioning solution to the kind of numbers that Dominic has shown? And it is interesting, because if you look at the original 7 ICBs, Gloucestershire is the second lowest and BNSG is the lowest. So we have potentially a commissioning challenge. No, a lowest in terms of the investment we place in mental health. The challenge might be to understand those numbers better, understand the Royal College of Psychiatrists that did it. Did it include all VCSE? Did it include all community? We need to do that, and then say, right, what is the right amount of resource that's needed to change for the population that we define, rather than just the performance indicator, which is 0 out of area. So we have work that I don't think we can leave that comment hanging. I think it needs to be in the minutes as a clear action. As a commissioner, we need to have better understanding, and we have to work out how we're shifting this.
So there's more a deep-rooted understanding, but we should still be aiming at zero.
Oh, 0 is absolutely, but there's an understanding of actually how do we sustain that? Because as you described, Dominic, there might be 2 periods in a year where there's a bump. And that has not a bump, but then has a ripple effect, which makes it big. A sustainable solution is able to cope with that. And so I think we've got to explore the sustainable solution, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Shane. Faye, did you want to come in?
Could I just make one comment, because it's really helpful, Shane, and that is that it's actually wider than sort of investment in mental health, because we were talking earlier, or you were talking earlier, about our priority is multi-morbidity and future-proofing that. And we know that if someone has a mental health difficulty, that is the multi-morbidity multiplier that makes them much more likely to go into an acute hospital for their physical health. So tackling our mental health also helps us with our priority as a system. Thank you.
Thanks, Faye. Points well made. Okay, thank you, everyone. Really healthy discussion on that one. Can I move on then to financial update? I'm conscious we ran through this at closed board this morning, but important this is reported in at the open session as well, so it's in the public domain. Kath.
In terms of financial position, so basically both organisations are reporting a surplus for 25-26. That's still being audited at the moment. So the audit is due to finish mid-June. So hopefully we will not see any changes from that. In terms of, I suppose the other thing just to pull out is a number of the risks we saw within 25-26 will translate into 26-27. So key ones of those will be ADHD and autism assessments. That's been a growing trend across the country. We have budgeted for increased amounts in 26-27 for both organisations, but that will be one area where we need to really test what we're doing and how we manage those services. Placements is another area where we have growing spend. There is work underway to look at that in terms of how do you intervene earlier on in the pathway, rather than just spending more and more on placements. Another area is medicine savings. We've had really good results for both organisations over the last year, really very positive, some as a result of national price changes, some as a result of the work that the meds teams do with our primary care colleagues. Just to note on that one, there is a risk that is emerging now within that, so GP collective action. The second part of that is a request that primary care stop using software within practices like Script Switch, which helps us to maintain those savings. There's a bit of risk around that emerging on the horizon. Other key changes, the ICB transition, and therefore maintaining that grip and control and moving things forward does create a transition. It is quite difficult to move on with some of the programmes of work whilst people are going through quite a significant change. Just to then note, NICE TAs, we obviously have weight management NICE TA, which is in implementation and rollout, and those cohorts increase year on year. So managing that carefully with public expectation is going to be one of those things we have to deal with. But also then at some point, I think there will be another TA that comes out which is successful around dementia, and that will be very significant. And whilst that may not come in the next year, that's something we should probably be planning for, particularly with the age profile for our population in each patch. So that's all I was going to highlight from the financial reports. Anything else?
Okay,
Happy to take questions.
Comments or questions from board members? Berger?
Just to extend the point that Kath made, this is hot off the press, the collective action from general practice. We are working through the options of what that would mean, and I'm a meeting with the Gloucestershire LMC tomorrow, and we'll go through what that means, because a significant amount of the savings, and MedSops do produce significant savings for us every year, is dependent on the fact that we are working with primary care, in particular, to ensure that we make the savings. So we are trying and we're working through that. As Kath says, in terms of the newer drugs that are coming, certainly within the MedSops team, we are looking horizon scanning as to what the impact's going to be, and we will work through it. So there's an active process by which we look what's around the corner, but events might overtake us.
Okay, thanks, Raghu. Any other comments or questions on the financial update? Ellen?
Yeah, I just got two questions. Could I just ask the first one first, and then I'll leave it to the second, if that's okay? Because the second links to the SFI, Standard Financial Instruments. So it's okay if I cover them both?
Yeah, far away.
Okay, fine. Because it might be the same answer. So first of all, can I just thank you, Kath, for the report, very clear. Can you say a little bit more about, on page 2, under delivery of recurrent savings, which are highlighted on page 2, just a little bit more about them and the impact going forward, and just for the benefit of the future FPQ, the committee that's going to be looking at that, which I'm chairing. Can you confirm whether that in the future would be something for us to keep an eye on, or whether that would move to board trusts and also to the region? So just a bit of clarity on that would be really helpful.
So in terms of the under delivery of recurrent savings, so that under delivery has been brought into budget setting for this financial year. So it's not it's not a further impact into this year. In terms of delivery for savings in 26-27, we have, I think, got greater clarity, or we have greater clarity in this coming year as to where savings will fall. So in previous years, things like CHC and prescribing very clearly fell into the ICB's remit and so on. Within, say, Gloucestershire, we had what we can term system savings. That was linked to the urgent care programme of work. Now that required a whole series of things to happen. Those were, I think, we've taken a lot of learning from that programme of work. Part of it is that when you make savings like that, we have to be very clear about who will take the benefit, whether we'll take an operational benefit, quality or financial, or some mix of those, and where that financial benefit will fall. So the under delivery within the Gloucestershire system last year related to that particular area. Going forward, what we will be doing is changing the way that we deliver things in terms of if there's a productivity and efficiency saving within a trust, that will be within their accountability, that will be their financial position to manage. If we want to reduce the amount we commission, we will commission differently, and then that saving will fall to the ICB if we're able to commission differently. So there will be, I think, a greater clarity around some of the previous savings where there was a system element to those savings.
So do you think some of it might be a little bit grey and we'll have to learn as we go along, or is it becoming really clear to you? I'm doing this from a governance perspective and understanding where as chair I need to be sort of position in this. So,
No, I think it's a good question because
yeah.
I'm not wholly clear on what is the responsibility of your committee
Yeah.
and what is the responsibility of others in the room.
Yeah.
So organisational positions are the organisation's responsibility. That has always been very clear. And going forward, the ICB doesn't have a responsibility for a system control total.
Okay.
So that is one change from 25-26 into 26-27.
So if that's going awry significantly, and it may be one individual organisation, that's what the responsibility of NHSE to deal with.
So NHSE will step in to that position and
Yeah, we've got a much greater role now with regards to that provider relationship. So if it's a provider, Jeff, that is the expectation. There's an interesting tension around the NHS operating framework because it's so time lagged. So some of that intervention will have to be earlier than perhaps some of the warning signals would suggest. So it would have to be off the early evidence rather than off the officially reported stuff. If that makes sense, because people are going to know this stuff earlier than some of the formal reporting through the NHS operating framework. That works a quarter in arrears a bit, and so we get data very late from that, and by then you're too late to turn some of this stuff around. So we have to work out how to do that. So that will be, how do we build a relationship with providers? How do we work with the ICBs in that process? But it will be for us to.
So I'm not asking Ellen's question for her, but it's prompted me to think now. Are you having that conversation in isolation, or is there a system conversation where you say, okay, we've got an acute that is in significant deficit? What's the impact for the thing? But that's NHSE are going to pick that up. So we're not expecting Ellen to be on that in the committee.
No, but I think it links back to our conversation from this morning around the OD work of how we're all going to work together. What's the right approach to get this right?
Catherine, what we have been thinking about that particular situation.
so just in brief, so our financial positions as with operational and performance are all interlinked. We can't really, do that different, in isolation. So if I just take finance, we will still continue to meet as a system, as just DOFs, informally, once every 2 weeks to talk through financial positions and that sort of thing. NHSE, as in Lindsay, will be in the room. So we will maintain quite close working relationships to try and informally in the background do some of that to make sure that we keep on track. We will need to work through as a system how we might work together more formally. So within BNSSG previously, there's been something called SEG, and in Gloucestershire Strategic Execs, and it's how do we take those forward and what role do they play in terms of, if I say, as a group of organisations, have accountability for playing our part within the system.
Thanks, Kath. I think we'll have to watch that one with interest. But to answer your question, Ellen, I'm going to bring Steve in because obviously he's wrestled with this for the last 3 or 4 years of BNSSG.
If I just add in the because this takes us to the financial instruments, which we're about to get to, the financial instructions. On 3.2.4, the bullet point states, and I'm sorry to be really specific about this, but I think it's really important, ensuring that the allocated, this is the CEO delegates to the finance director, ensuring that the allocated annual revenue and capital resource limits are not exceeded. So my question, is that true? And is it just for the ICB as a small organisation, or is it for a wider system?
ICB.
Just the ICB. I just think it might be worth probably amending those words so that we're just really clear on that. So it's just for the ICB.
Okay, I mean, they are the ICB's financial structure, so it's not
Well,
a
I think we
system
clarified at the
set.
board.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Thanks, Ellen. Steve?
Earlier we had a conversation which was around everybody needing to know what position and game they were playing. And this is an example, I think. So we learned how to play a game as a system where the ICB had oversight of our systems and financial was part of that game. The game is now going to change. With colleagues in NHS England at regional level, we'll be looking at the performance of the individual provider organisations from the financial perspective. We will need to take care of that we commission to make sure that we're getting value for money from that we get, that we're commissioning. But the performance bit sits over there.
Well, first and foremost,
performance against the contract. Yeah,
organisation.
no, I'm talking about the finance bit. The contract bit sits with us but we're going to have to get everybody to understand the new rules. And I think that bit, whilst we've got our terms and everything else, is what we're going to have to clear so that everybody is clear where the accountability sits, provide organisations for themselves, but then where is the challenge if something's going wrong? And then where does the ICB sit in that space, if at all? Because we're looking at a system. And I think the clearer we can be from the outset, the easier it is going to be to navigate our way
I know
through.
Shane and Kath have been having that conversation, but Richard, as your point about organisational development, we need to make sure we're really very clear on that, don't we?
Yeah.
So it doesn't slip through the net.
And there might be an informal role where Kath is setting this up, but formal governance is just being really clear on just any of that comes through us, and if not, then that's absolutely fine.
Okay. Thanks, Ellen.
Thanks.
Any other questions on the financial update? I think sorry, Joe.
I appreciate I answered this in the private session, but I think it's important enough that we should, repeat it in public session. So apologies to colleagues who've heard it before. But clearly there is a recognition of the huge demand in SEND and autism that's impacting on the financial performance last year. And I wanted assurance that there is sufficient budget to cover that demand in this financial year moving forwards. And I think, Shane, your answer in private session would be helpful in public session as well.
So from an in-year perspective, we signed up to a plan and absolutely we'll deliver that. I think the conversation we want to get into with all four local authorities, because we are co-signatories to these plans, is how we do this over a medium to longer term rather than just how we do it in 26-27. So we know what we have to do, and I certainly can't put my signature on something and then not address the fact that it needs resource. So we'll be working with all four. But for the purpose of the board, we have absolutely in our plan this year the resources to deliver what we committed to this year.
Okay. Thanks, Shane. Any other questions on? Sorry, Jane.
No, just one or a couple of quick ones. One is just congratulations to the teams for the performance over the last 12 months in terms of delivery, which is really really important and actually not that common across the NHS. And the second one is picking up on Ellen's point and Steve's point is, would it be useful for us, if you haven't already, I mean, you may have already done it, but to do some scenario planning about, this happens in this part of the patch, what would we actually do? How would we do it? And just test it, because it might be that it will uncover either some issues around, whose role it is to do what and when, but also just identify where potential gaps might be or risks might be. So it might be relatively simple to do, but to give it a try, either around finance or performance or a quality issue or whatever.
Yeah. First of all, really happy to do that in partnership with NHSE, because it has to be more than happy. I think the other thing, just before we close the conversation, to Steve's point, we need to understand what the ICB responsibilities are. But having been a provider for 25 years before I came on to the commissioning side, I think it's very clear providers know what their responsibilities are. And we sometimes sit around this table and sometimes want to manage providers. Providers know what they're responsible for. They have a board, they have a chair, they have a chief executive, they have a team, and they have a clear, and therefore we shouldn't overreach as an ICB. Providers know what they're responsible for. What we'll be doing is putting stronger contracts in place which are outcome focused, and that might be difficult because we're not used to measuring outcome focused contracts. But please be assured, if I was Dominic or Douglas or Kevin and Maria on here today, they know what they're responsible for. And I think we cloud it a little bit by the ICB wanting to be. I think if we have people in the room, there could be a real explanation. Providers know what they're responsible for.
I do agree with that, Shane. There's a little bit of devil's advocate here, which is we do not need to be duplicating effort.
Correct.
We should not be doing that. However, as chair of a large acute in Bristol, I knew what I was responsible for. I had very little idea what Dominic was responsible for, or primary care, or local government, unless I took a personal interest.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, my exec team became, they had a big organisation, but they became very insular in the way they looked at things, to the point that they never met with local government.
And I think,
and I know we moved on massively. We have massively, but that's just the you know, that system convening role, it's been of huge value. Just by getting to a room like this for a day has a huge value, but we don't need to be duplicating effort.
And you know, Shane, I think the question is all about clarity.
Yeah.
So that we are not doing, I'm not doing something on my agenda that's not needed. I think it's more about clarity, and I think Steve's explained it really well. So
and I suppose what I'm saying is trust cannot go off and just do in the absence of the system. But I think what we've moved to now is that the system is a system. Organisations are connected. And actually the piece of what we're going to move into is what's the system of the future with integrated healthcare organisations, etc. But I think it's really important that organisations trust, clear understanding, even more clear understanding, I think, this year when you sign off a financial plan and a performance plan, which are being managed for directly. Our job is therefore not to lose the partnership element of our system, and we'll work really hard on that. But accountability for performance and money absolutely lies with the provider. But we've got to hold the partnership together. And both Gloucestershire and BNSSG have done so much in being partners. We can't let that disappear. We really can't. I think Dominic is a provider.
Just a quick addendum. There's also almost a materiality question. So if AWP goes off its financial plan by 10%, you won't really notice. I'll feel it, but you won't really notice. If a large combined acute hospital group goes plan 10%, we'll all feel it.
Yeah.
So there's something about how we go into that one.
And having sat there, Dominic, it shapes my behaviour as to where I focus my attention. And it might not be on Serona or AWP or local government. It might be on something very internally focused within that acute. Might be. And I think Shane's right. We moved miles away from when I was there 3 or 4 years ago. But I do know it exists. And particularly an organisation that's very large and has got 30,000 people in it, it can happen. So Shane Marie is not here because she would bite my head off now, rightly so. Okay, I'm going to move on from this. Thank you. I think it's been a useful conversation. It's quite a nice segue into the next item, which is on cluster committee terms of reference. And when we finish today, the execs and non-execs are going to have a session that looks at the detail around committees. You may not be aware, but I've written out to the chairs of your organisations, just talking about engagement with the committees and non-exec engagement, because that was very productive when we had the committees up until now. They come back with some questions about how they'll be involved and what they'll do. And I think we'll thrash some of that out now afterwards for the execs and non-execs. But this, Rob, is about the terms of reference for those 3 committees. I suspect some NEDs may have a little bit more to add, but if you want to just run us through it, and I'll open up for questions.
Yeah, also. Yeah, okay. So thank you. It does segue in really nicely, doesn't it? As a cluster, we need governance to operate as a strategic commissioning organisation, the organisation that we're moving to. Okay, since at least December, if not slightly before, there have been ongoing conversations around what the committees of the cluster might look like to service our needs. And we've already established the Joint Transition Committee, which was something that was set out in the model ICB blueprint. It said you need to have one of these to oversee that. So that is not here for discussion today. And we also know that we need to have a remuneration committee. That's not here today. That's already in operation. It's a joint remuneration committee already. It's met once in common and then subsequently in joint. There are some tweaks to make to the membership of that, and I will make sure that those are done. The membership is actually shown correctly in the paper, even though the terms of reference aren't here. So I should just make the alignment there. And Alison's nodding at me to just confirm the conversation that we were having earlier. The nature of the committees is set out in the paper, and there will be, and the terms of reference are here today, the Finance, Performance and Quality Committee, the Transformation, People and OD Committee, and the Strategic Health Inequalities Prevention, Population Health and Commissioning Committee, which will probably get shortened to SHIP. I'm sure a lot of them will go to acronyms in due course. And those terms of reference are here for agreement here today, please. They've been developed with multiple conversations with non-executive directors, chief officers, and in some cases more than once to get them to where they are now. I think there's a general consensus from those conversations that we want to get something started and that we will then work out whether we've got it right. And with that, I've made a recommendation in this paper to the board that the terms of reference, which would normally be reviewed annually, are done within the year, obviously to be triggered by the board to check, have we got it right? Have we got the membership right? Are the scopes right? Have we got the right committees? Is there another one that's needed, etc.? So with that in mind, the terms of reference are here with the hope that you'll be able to say, I'm happy with the scope of those committees. I'm happy with the chief officer and non-executive membership of those committees, noting what Jeff has just said around writing out, seeking participants from other organisations which have been valuable to both BNSSG committees and Gloucestershire committees in the past. So those will be then added, and I'm sure an update can be brought back to the board around who's been added as part of perhaps the committee updates once they start to happen. But then, given that this is a board decision and that the board has already agreed the scheme of reservation and delegation for the cluster, I'm hoping that by agreeing these terms of reference, the board will also be happy that I then update the scheme of reservation and delegation to reflect the scope of each committee without the board needing to have a paper back to say, I'm doing it again, having done it here today. So that's my presentation of this paper. I'm going to take the terms of reference as being read, but happy, Jeff, to take any questions or comments.
Thanks, Rob. Any observations or comments or questions? Douglas.
So interesting. Before that previous discussion, when I first read the papers, I was going to make a similar comment to everything we've just discussed, and you've made the link, but actually being really clear in terms of the scope of the committees, in terms of the ICB business. There are a couple of areas where we could get into a bit of, particularly on things like health inequalities and other things, we could get into does this committee ask for other providers and others to kind of update, give assurance, all that kind of stuff? And you could then get into a slightly mushy space again in terms of are people really, really clear? So I think wherever we can, being extremely clear, there's about the ICB role, what the ICB has commissioned, the effectiveness of what the ICB has commissioned, but deliberately staying away from the sort of slightly performance management of other parts, because then we link into the NHS England role. So I think there's maybe just a couple of places that would be even clearer, but I haven't got any specific comments. I think recognising your comment about partners and non-execs and partners, again, same comment, been helpful before, but in committees that had a slightly different focus. So we've got to be really clear when we're speaking to colleagues, it's not just the same as it was. If you went to a previous committee, the committee is going to be more focused on the strategic commissioning role only, not actually doing the collective partnership in the committee itself.
Yeah, thanks, Douglas. And it would be really useful that after we finish today that I'm able to have that conversation with the NED. You've got the chairs of the committees here, but also I will do my utmost to sit across all the committees to make sure we get that consistency in the way we're doing it. So a good point well made. Ellen?
Yeah, can I just say, first of all, Rob, thanks for all the work you've done on this. I know it's been really, really challenging and difficult. And I see these evolving quite rapidly as soon as we start the committees. I'm really keen that, especially finance, performance, quality, that I sit down with the other NEDs and that we go through this in a bit of detail. There are a lot of descriptive words which are seek assurance, provide assurance, oversee, that I think needs some discussion and debate about whether the committee provides assurance, seeks assurance, or oversees, because it's dotted throughout. So happy to accept these for now, but rapidly, hopefully by September, come up with a revised version of it.
Thanks, Ellen. Good point. Okay.
Yeah, a similar point. There's a couple of minor, well, relatively minor, but important things, is that the committee terms of reference membership doesn't always reflect what's in the chart, the ticks and stuff. So that's just minor changes that need to be made. But I mean, Joe and I have been quite involved in the ship one, but I would like to have that reviewed by when we have the wider members of that committee, particularly because we will potentially talk about external advisors, etc., being part of that, and I would be really interested in their views, particularly seeing as we're focusing on race equity, and therefore I feel that in particular really does need some external oversight and the ability to comment on it. So, but I think the same principle. This is a work in progress, and I think we can bring them back relatively quickly, having had one or two.
So what I'm hearing is it does make sense to agree a set of terms of reference for us to get on with things, but that we need to be flexible enough to make changes as and when. Rob, does that cause a massive headache?
I don't think it does from a governance perspective, and I think the devil's in the detail of what's in the work plan, and the work plan will obviously be delivered by what is it you want to bring, that then who is doing the bringing of it, and that's therefore got to be what comes through from the staff structures, etc., and the new ways of doing performance reporting or whatever is the report that's required. Let's leave performance out of it, because otherwise we get into that difficult territory around who's doing performance. But I think the devil's in the detail of the work plan. The membership is clearly important, and I think, Jeff, I don't think it could support.
And you'll be sat on the beach somewhere probably anyway, so you won't be concerned about.
I might be sat over there.
You won't be concerned about terms of reference for a committee. That's for sure. Okay. Any other? I mean, that sounds a sensible way forward. Any other comments that people have made from having read the papers?
Yeah, just on the transformation people in OD one, given what we've spoken about, you've got a table in there, Rob, about potential other attendees, whether it's worth in the short term at least having NHSE as one of your potential other attendees in there, not necessarily a full member, but attendee, given what we've spoken about.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Are we happy? I mean, the recommendation's got agreed terms of reference. Note there'll be a review. No arrangements to be made to set up the first meetings and support the standard operating procedures. Anything?
So schemes of reservation and delegation. And if I may just be really clear on that point.
Be pedantic now, right?
I am going to be pedantic because that's governance's role. So what I will make sure is that with the updates, these are then published as part of the governance handbook, including the updates to the scheme of reservation and delegation.
Okay.
Thank you.
People happy with that? Okay, let's move on then. Selling financial instructions then, Kath.
So you approved the SFIs at the last meeting. There have been a few small changes subsequently, some tidying up and also some updating just to the procurement legislation. So just brought them back here for reapproval.
Okay. Any comments or questions from anybody?
I got, Jeff, I just got one, and I can't, it may be just my reading of it. I'm just desperately trying to find it. It's 6.5.6, and I'm being really pedantic, but it says it's about the approval process will involve the chief exec and the chief officer. And I was just wondering, is that the chief finance officer, or is it the chief, or can it be any of the chief officers? And I'm just trying to find where it is. I didn't write the page number, which is a bit stupid. I should have done. I think it might be on page 189.
Is that 6.5.6?
Yeah, it's in red, so I'm assuming
So
it's one of the track changes ones.
Chief officer is any of the exec directors.
That's fine. Yeah, it says there's one where it says things can be signed off by the chief finance officer and another. Chief executive officer and chief officer, 500 to 1 million. That would be, that's the chief. That's Shane and any one of the chief officers. Correct. That's fine. It was just wanted to be really clear. It wasn't a typo. Not that I'm assuming you would put a typo, but I just thought I'd check.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? No? Okay, thanks very much. So the final item for today is around questions from members of the public. Bren has submitted 3 questions to us. I'll get Rob to read them out in turn. The first one relates to circumcision, and I think Raghu, you might want to just come in at the end of this around. We'll cover the response, but you might want to come in at the end because it might be relevant to your area. The second one is around institutional racism, And the third one is around strategic commissioning, which I think Shane covered a lot of in his update. So, Rob, do you want to just run through the questions one by one, and then we'll respond to them?
Thank you. So the first question is, what support with insight and knowledge across the cluster's geographical area can the cluster offer in exploring a circumcision service in Gloucestershire? So, Bren, I'll bring you in the end. You've got some time on it, but the response I've got here, NHS Gloucestershire ICB commissions circumcision in both adults and children for medical reasons only. The specific commissioning criteria for circumcision are set out in the ICB's published policy, which is available on the ICB's public website. The ICB currently commissions circumcision services from several local providers to meet local medical needs and support patient choice. And benchmarking data demonstrates that local rates of circumcision are currently above national rates. Given this, the ICB does not currently have any plans to expand its services in Gloucestershire, supporting information is available if needed, and we can send you that on all the links, Bren. Raghu, anything you'd add to that?
That's our current position. We did ask ARC West to look at some of the procedures and do an audit on that, and where we benchmark against national, and actually we showed that our local rate is higher than the national one. So this ARC West did it independently for us to look at that particular question, and we found that we're actually doing higher than the national average.
Okay, thanks, Raghu. Bren, does that answer your question? Oh, yeah. I mean, we'll email it through to you anyway, but it's basically saying that our rates, and we use several organisations, but our rates in Gloucestershire are higher than elsewhere in the country. So, yeah, and we can provide that in writing as well. So, thanks, Bren. The second one, do you want to read that out, Rob?
Yeah, thank you. So second question is the Bristol, North Somerset, South Gloucestershire and Gloucestershire, that's the cluster, institutionally and or structurally racist? What past and present evidence does the cluster have to robustly evidence their position?
So Ben, I'll respond to this one. This is really important to me, but I know this is really important to the board, about our response around being an anti-racist organisation. This is something that people can answer in a very glib way, and it's not a glib subject. So we've done a lot of work around anti-racism. We continue to do so. I think our response on this one about that question of institutional racism, because you know in my career I've been asked this a lot. I think it's a board discussion, and I think the board, because for me to speak for all the organisations around the table would not be appropriate. We need a wider board discussion across the two clusters to have a position on this. But just to reassure, there's an awful lot going on in this area. It's a shame Tracy Joliffe couldn't be with us today, who's our chair of our independent advisory group, because she talked about some of the stuff we're doing, and obviously some of the stuff that Joe has done in the SHIP committee, but also the work that you've been involved in, I know, with a lot of local communities in the Gloucestershire area. So this is front and centre. We've had a number of board discussions on it already. I think we need to do a bit more work before we make a statement about institutional racism, but enough to say that we are absolutely committed to being an anti-racist organisation. Anything else you wanted from that one, Bren?
No, thanks, Jeff, and thanks for being so honest. But it's a very, very difficult question. But it's really most importantly, I have very interest here, because I sit on the NHS Raising Up to Sector Engagement Group, so I don't want to be misleading on it. I think what I want as a thought really is, as we do all this work, what is the impact of that? And what measure, and are we measuring it through a corporate approach, or are we measuring it on the impact of people that I see and serve day after day in the community may not feel this?
So, Bren, absolutely right. That's what we're here to do, isn't it? And for many of us around the table, and I think as an integrated care board in Gloucestershire, you know, you've been very engaged in it. The work that Joe has done in the Strategic Health and Equality Committee has shone a light on the inequality of services and how we need to respond to that in a different way. And you'll have picked that up from some of the conversation here today. But Shane, I know it's in our schedule. it's one that we need to be getting our teeth into quite soon. Okay, thanks, Ben.
Jeff, I'll help where I can and make sure some people right. There is the impact leadership at this as well, and there was a conference I was invited to in London specifically around distance and guidance, which I'm happy to share, but I'll speak to the some people know around the table and Maria. But we need to have that support as well, not just challenging, support too.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. It's really helpful. And the final
third question, with the strategic commissioning role of Bristol, North Somerset, South Gloucestershire and Gloucestershire, that's the cluster. What strategic commissioning benefit or not does the cluster envisage in the merging of NHS provider organisations, for example, Gloucestershire Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust and Gloucestershire Health and Care NHS Foundation Trust? Accepting merge is a matter for the NHS provider organisations. The question explicitly focuses on the strategic commissioning of the cluster.
So, Bren, I've got written response here. I'll ask Shane to cover it now. You may have heard some of it in Shane's update on the CEO. So, Shane, if there's anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah, so clearly, as you heard through the Chief Executive update, our focus in our strategic commissioning approach is not looking at organisational merger. Our approach is looking at neighbourhood and asking the question, how do we strategically commission for neighbourhoods? That may result at some point in time in organisations looking at structure. That might, it might not. But we're starting with population and place first, not organisation first. So the response gives you that. But hopefully you heard from the Chief Executive report, our aim is to look at place and population and how we coalesce around that, not on organisational structure. Having had the pleasure of running a couple of mergers in previous life, you spend an awful lot of time looking at structure, an awful lot of time looking at who's got jobs, when actually you should be looking at population. And therefore our focus is very, very much on place, population, and actually how we coalesce around that and commission for that, not on how do we commission for organisational merger.
Thanks, Shane. But Bren, thanks for the questions. We will send them out in writing so you can share them with community groups you're engaged with if you wish to do so. That's great. But again, thanks as always for contributing the way you do.
Thank you.
If I may just say, we did receive a fourth question that didn't come in time, so we'll make sure that's put on the agenda for a future meeting.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Any other business? Anything from anyone that we don't feel we've covered today? Can I just say then, it's very hot in here.
It is quite hot now. It's got hot.
I'm sure you're melting. It's 1:45. We haven't done too badly. We've covered an awful lot of ground today and some really helpful conversations. So a big thank you. Grateful for everyone attending. Have a safe journey home.
Thank you. Thank you.